When Mazda made the decision to not bring the diminutive Mazda2 to our shores a couple of years ago, they instead brought over a vehicle that was designed to appeal to the core of the American market. That vehicle was the 2016 Mazda CX-3. Now, after a few years on the market, Mazda has decided to give the CX-3 a pretty good amount of updates for 2019, which is why I'm out here on this rainy fall afternoon to show you guys the refreshed 2019 model. But the big question you're probably wondering, has Mazda continued to make the CX-3 appealing to those of you who want a really small crossover? That's what we're here to find out. So it's probably cool rainy afternoons like this that make people want to buy a crossover as opposed to a small compact car. The all-wheel drive is definitely a huge selling feature, which is why Mazda brought out the CX-3 a couple years ago. This is essentially just a raised up Mazda 2 with the option of all-wheel drive. And you can see the design of this car has definitely aged well. In fact, it was one of the first subcompact SUVs to come to market, and I still think it's one of the most stylish. Now, this particular one that I'm showing you is the Grand Touring trim. You'll be able to distinguish it from the standard LED low and high beam headlights. You have the signature Mazda LED daytime running light. The turn signal, unfortunately, is incandescent. The fog light, they do give you an LED fog light, but you can see the turn signal is actually down here. And overall, I think that the changes they've made are so subtle, you're really gonna have to squint hard to see the differences in the actual grille, the headlights, the lower front fascia. And overall, I think this car still looks particularly handsome, especially in this soul red crystal paint job. So moving along to the side profile of the CX-3, you can see the Grand Touring trim will come with these really attractive set of 18-inch machine finished alloy wheels. They're wrapped in two 15 series tires. This other trims will kind of have a smaller 17-inch wheel. And you can really see the diminutive proportions of this car when you look at the actual side profile. Like every other crossover, you have the requisite cladding. And this vehicle is very small, even by today's standards for small cars. At 101.2 inches long in the wheelbase, it's the same wheelbase length as the Mazda 2, which we do not get here. But if you look at the Toyota Yaris IA, that's the same length. And 168 inches overall, this is again about the same length as the Toyota Yaris IA, which is the Mazda 2 sedan. Now, like every other crossover in this segment, you do have a nice higher roof line to give this vehicle a little bit more space. But overall, one thing I'm noticing is there's no tinted windows back here. And I have two theories for that. I think it's because this vehicle is not classified as an SUV in the government's eyes, or Mazda was simply just cutting corners. They did cut corners, however, with the rear suspension because it is just a torsion beam, semi-independent, as opposed to the full independent, which is kind of the norm when you look at the smaller subcompact segment. Now, at the rear of the CX-3, you can see there are also very subtle changes. I mean, most of the models will have this nicely indicated rear spoiler, no tinted glass as well. And then the taillights, they're refreshed slightly. They're LED combination. The actual brake lights are LED. The turn signal, however, is not. And then down here, you can see more of that black cladding. I like how Mazda puts actual dual chrome tipped exhaust, although it's not really necessary in a vehicle that only has a 4-cylinder engine, but it makes this vehicle look a little bit sportier. Now, like every other vehicle in this segment, you do not get a power tailgate on this model, even though this is the fully loaded trim. And the cargo area is the biggest weakness of the CX-3. This is puny, very puny, only 12.4 cubic feet of space, which is less than what you get in something like Mazda's own 3 sedan or a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla. This is pretty puny. You do have a little bit of storage underneath here, but overall the space is very small. Now, if you do get rid of this, fold down the seats back there, you'll get around 42 cubic feet of space, which is about 15 cubic feet less than what you get in something like the Honda HR-V. Moving on to the interior of the CX-3, it is nicely refreshed, and we'll get to that in just a moment, but you can see here's the key fob for the vehicle. If you guys go for a touring and up, you will get Mazda's smart key access system with push button start. No power liftgate, as I said earlier. You have to go up to the larger CX-5 if you guys want that feature. Now, first approaching the door handle, there's a button on the door handle just like every other Mazda. If you touch it, it locks the door. There's no sensor on the back. You have to touch the door handle again. It'll beep twice, and that will unlock the door for you. Now, you can see here's the interior of my Grand Touring model. well. It looks really nice, especially with the Soul Red crystal, with the two-tone parchment interior is really nice. It makes a really nice first impression. A couple of features I'm also noticing that my Tester has: 6-way power driver's seat with an actual lumbar adjustment and 2-person memory. That's very rare in this segment, so bravo, kudos to Mazda for including something like that. But now, getting into the vehicle, you actually fall into the vehicle. It doesn't feel like it's sitting up higher like a crossover, like so many competitors, and that's probably why the rear windows are not tinted, because this feels more like a hatchback now when you shut the door. It still sounds nice and solid, which is great. It gives you a nice impression of quality. Now, if you want to start the vehicle up, all you have to do is put your foot on the brake and then push this button here to fire up the engine. Now you can see my Tester, being the GT trim, does give you the head-up display with that flip-up glass. It's kind of the older head-up display that we've seen on other Mazda products. And you can see the gauges here haven't really changed. They're pretty standard gauges that we've seen in the Mazda3. They're a little bit old. Honestly, Mazda has a better looking display in vehicles like the CX-5 or the Mazda Miata and the Mazda6. And you can see here, the interior has been nicely updated. I see a lot of influence in here from the Mazda Miata with the circular vents, with the way this looks. I really like the new suede that they put on the dashboard here. It's nice and soft touch. This here is all hard touch plastic, but that's kind of what I expected in this segment. The door panel materials, they're all hard touch plastic, but it's nice and padded right here and right here. There's a good storage here for your phone. The window is one touch express up down for only the driver's side, which is what I expected in this segment. You can see there's an all new steering wheel in this vehicle for 2019. It's the same steering wheel that I showed you on the Mazda3, the Mazda6, the CX-9. It does have paddles on the wheel, and then you have your usual buttons here. This vehicle, because it's a GT, does come with Mazda's safety systems with the driver assistance stuff. It has adaptive cruise control with full speed range. No active lane keep assist, just lane departure alert, but you do have blind spot monitoring, of course, which is pretty nice. Now, looking at the center stack here, you can see this is the 7-inch Mazda Connect head unit. I'm not going to go too much in depth with this because I've shown you that in the past before. This does include a backup camera. When you put it into reverse, you do have just a standard backup camera, no trajectory, and then no parking sensor. This is a very small vehicle, no 360 camera, so it's pretty much standard stuff. There's no Apple CarPlay and no Android Auto on this car. I don't know why Mazda went to refresh this car for 2019 and didn't include that. It is coming on vehicles like the 6, the CX-9, and then the CX-5 should be the next one to get that feature. This system itself is a touchscreen if you guys have it parked. If it's not parked, you have to go to the actual command controller right here, which does give you basically nice controls. It has nice shortcut buttons. Your volume control is there. Electronic parking brake is there. Over here you can see there's your heated wheel control. 3-level heated seats, no cooled seats, of course. I wasn't expecting that. You have single zone automatic climate control, which again, these are lifted straight out of the Mazda Miata. Down here you can see there's a nice place to put your phone, 2 USB ports, an aux port here, no wireless charging, wasn't expecting that. This here controls the 6-speed automatic transmission. This is a Mazda design transmission. It does have a manual mode down here, traditional shifter. You also have a sport mode here where you can kind of just flick this up or flick it down. It puts it into a sport mode or normal mode. It's very straightforward. Now, this is basically the newest addition for 2019. You could not get a center console armrest in this car from the factory. I believe they had it as a dealer accessory, but love this armrest. It's at a great location. It doesn't actually slide forward or up. It feels a little bit flimsy, but it's nice and padded. There's another bit of cup holder storage right here, which is nice. And overall, this is a really nice addition. But really, when you get into this car, it just feels really narrow and really cramped, which is not something that people in America particularly like. It just reminds you that this is a small car based off of a really small chassis. And again, it's probably one of the reasons why everyone really just goes for the CX-5. The glove compartment here, it isn't damped, it kind of cheaply falls, but it's a pretty big size, not lined with felt. And then above you, you get a standard size sunroof here, which is included on the GT as standard equipment. And then the seats, I find them to be pretty comfortable, actually. I love the contrasting piping with the parchment. It looks really good. It looks really upscale. And overall, the interior is nicely updated, just very, very cozy. Now, being a small car on the outside, those small dimensions are definitely transferred into the back seat of this vehicle. And you can see getting back here, this is very tight, even by the subcompact standards. This is kind of where I had the front seats adjusted for me to have decent amount of room. Now, I'm 5'7", and this is very, very small. I mean, the seat is practically almost up against my knees. There is decent foot room underneath the seats, but there's actually a hump here that takes up space for the middle passenger. And then, as I expected, there's no rear seat vents, no power outlets, really, no heated rear seats. I was kind of expecting that. Now, the seat bench itself actually is surprisingly comfortable. I like the leather. It's nice and soft. You do get a nice armrest here that folds down. Also gives you 2 cup holders here, and then headroom I think is okay. But overall, you guys really are going to be noticing how cramped this vehicle is, especially when you look at competitors like the HR-V or the Subaru Crosstrek. So underneath the hood of the refreshed CX-3, Mazda hasn't made any changes, which they didn't really need to. They did increase the horsepower of this car by 2. It's still a 2-liter 4-cylinder Skyactiv G with direct injection. It's a high compression. It's got its own unique header, 148 horsepower up to, or 146 pound-feet of torque. Now those numbers are pretty paltry by today's modern standards, but it actually is slightly more powerful than vehicles like the Honda HR-V, the Toyota CHR, the Nissan Kicks. So it's a pretty decent amount of power. Now you can take your pick between either front or all-wheel drive for like $1,400, and Mazda does not offer a manual transmission on this model like they did on the CX-5. This only comes with a 6-speed Skyactiv automatic transmission, and fuel economy, it's pretty good, rated at 27 in the city, 32 on the highway. This vehicle weighs around 2,900 pounds. Let's get out on the road and see how it all performs. So it's definitely been about 3 years since I first drove Mazda's CX-3, and back then I really liked the car's sporty driving dynamics, but this class of vehicle still hasn't always been my favorite. So 3 years later, as I said, Mazda has added 2 horsepower to this car, which I don't anticipate you're going to really notice in everyday driving. And if you guys are familiar with the way a lot of current Mazda products drive, this car will feel super familiar. The first thing that immediately stands out is the rather buzzy engine in this car, which is really surprising to me because this 2-liter 4-cylinder it's the same engine that you find in the Mazda 3 and the Mazda Miata even, although the new Miata has the engine that has the higher Redline, the adjusted horsepower with the increased power. This car definitely reminds you of its subcompact car roots when you're driving it, especially on the highway. The engine makes a lot of noise, although some of the noise I feel like Mazda almost did it on purpose because they wanted this car to be sportier than a lot of its competition, and the CX-3 definitely feels sportier. The main difference with this car and the sportier theme definitely has to do with the actual handling of the CX-3. The steering is very quick. It's very direct. The vehicle changes directions quickly. It doesn't feel like I'm driving a raised up SUV at all. It feels like I'm driving just a hatch, basically. It's one of the lowest feeling sport utility vehicles I've ever driven, and the visibility in here is also pretty good. The pillars here are rather thin. You have a good view out of the front. The side mirrors are also large. The Grand Touring model comes with all of Mazda's driver assistance tech, so it has the blind spot monitoring with a cross traffic alert. It has lane departure warning, no actual lane departure steering, lane keep assist. It also has adaptive cruise control with full speed range, so that was kind of unexpected in this segment. But when you drive the CX-3 out on the highway, this is where a lot of people may be spending a lot of time with this vehicle. It isn't too bad, to be honest. I mean, the ride quality is firmer than some of you may be expecting. That you can attribute that to the torsion beam rear suspension. The noise levels are also rather high in this vehicle. You hear a lot of road noise, some wind noise creeps in at 70 miles an hour, and the engine just always makes itself known. But I do find the seats to be comfortable, and overall it's a much better car than what you got from a lot of subcompact cars from 5 years ago. That's the thing, is when you drive this class of vehicle, you have to remind yourself it's basically a subcompact car, a cheap car that's been raised up to give you the all-wheel drive traction, which in these crappy conditions, it's been raining in the DC area here for the past 3 days almost. It's really nice to have the all-wheel drive grip. It's just this car's acceleration is rather disappointing. I mean, 0 to 60 times were around 8.5 seconds for the car, which is actually quicker than a lot of its competition. But there's a reason why I personally think that you should just go for the compact segment, because you get a little bit more power, a little bit more refinement, a little bit more luxury for not that much money, to be honest. The head-up display in this car is definitely something that's a little bit rare in the segment. I think the new Hyundai Kona also offers it, which is a similar flip-up display. But there's just a lot of things about this car that I think that Mazda could have gone a different direction. I mean, sure, they wanted it to be a sportier offering, but I don't think people in this segment really care too much for the sportier part. It's just a really cozy feeling car. It feels very narrow. You're very close to your passenger or next to you on the passenger side. And I just think that overall, they could have either, if they're going to make it this sporty, they should have given us something with even more power, something with a manual transmission, basically just give us a speed version, or give us something that's a little bit more toward the comfort end, which is what people in this segment are really, or at least people in America are really looking for. But just taking some of these off-ramps here on the highway, you can see the CX-3 basically feels like you're driving almost like a Mazda 3. It doesn't have very much body lean. The transmission does a really good job at holding gears. It shifts quickly. The steering provides lots of feedback. It's a little wet out here on these all-season tires, so I'm a little bit afraid to push it as much. I feel the car will understeer rather quickly when I do that. But I mean, if you need to attack some of your favorite back roads, the CX-3 has really good handling. It drives really nicely when the road gets twisty, which could be a great thing, but just keep in mind that a lot of its competitors are definitely skew more toward the comfort end. So this is that, that refreshing take, Mazda's take, basically, that will definitely still impress a lot of enthusiasts, especially if you're just looking for cheap wheels. Flooring it from a stop here. This car is slow. But you know what? Despite how slow it is, it takes some time. The engine revs up quickly. And you know what? At higher RPMs, I don't mind the sound. It's just at lower RPMs, it's a little bit buzzier. The transmission also shifts well. And it's also a conventional 6-speed auto. It's not that horrible CVT you find in a lot of its competition. And you know what? This thing is not too bad. It really isn't too bad when you start pushing it. I don't feel the extra 2 horsepower. But I do feel a lot more secure and safe in this vehicle than I would in something like, a subcompact car, like a Chevrolet, like the old, Chevrolet Aveo, which is now a Sonic, or it feels a little bit more substantial than cars like a Honda Fit. Now let's talk about the fuel economy of this vehicle. In my weeks for the testing, I've been averaging a tick under 23 mpg, which is pretty bad considering this is rated at 27. Just keep in mind that I have been driving it with more of a lead foot. I've been enjoying the extra power or the acceleration, the noise this thing gives you. I imagine if you guys have a little bit lighter foot, you'll do better. When I did reset the trip and just do a pure highway run, I got around 31 miles per gallon. So not too bad, not wonderful. I was hoping that something like this would, skew closer to 40 mpg. But you're really noticing the rough ride quality on the highway like now. I'll put the transmission back into its normal mode. It tends to stay out of its overdrive gear when it's in sport. But this car just never really settles down. It's a little bit frantic, a little bit high-strung all the time, and that will definitely get tiring for people who just consistently drive these out on the highway. It's probably better suited for the city, but again, the stiff ride quality, which is pretty norm in this segment, will kind of deter you from wanting to drive this thing on the cities, because that kind of environment has really terrible road quality as well. So you make a lot of compromises with a vehicle in the subcompact SUV segment. It just, again, reminds you why you should just spend a little bit more money and get a compact car or compact SUV. So if you look at the current crop of Mazda products, everything is mostly very competitive in every segment it competes with. Unfortunately, the CX-3 is a little bit of an outlier. This vehicle, while still has relatively good bones, just has too cramped of an interior and cargo area for it to be useful for most people here in America. Now, as you guys saw also from the driving dynamics, it's still a relatively sporty handling vehicle. Unfortunately, its engine is a little bit buzzy, which everything in the segment is. Its ride quality is also a little bit too harsh because of that torsion beam rear suspension and the bigger wheels and tires. And unfortunately, if Mazda was going to go for more of the sportier route, I think they should have just gone out with a full-on Mazda speed version with a turbo and given this thing some serious power to kind of appeal to the enthusiast, because if you're actually looking to put people and stuff, there are far better choices in the segment. With all that being said, what's it going to cost to put a CX-3 in your driveway if space is not a priority? Well, this vehicle is relatively inexpensive. It starts at just over $20,000, $20,390 for 2019, which is only about $1,000 more than a Mazda 3 5-door. To be honest, I rather would just go for the Mazda 3. But it makes the CX-3 a relatively good value. Add about $1,400 if you guys want the company's all-wheel drive system, which you can't get on a Mazda 3, but keep in mind that this vehicle is smaller on the inside in the cargo and in the rear seat versus the Mazda 3 hatchback. Now, most of you are probably going to go for a touring trim level for like another $2,000 that gives you the advanced keyless access, the power driver's seat. This particular one being the GT gives you the LED headlights, the heated seats, the sunroof. This one starts at a little over $27,000, which is pretty expensive considering you can get something like a CX-5 or a CR-V or a RAV4 for that kind of money. My tester with the premium package that adds the heated steering wheel, the memory seats for another $700, stickers for a grand total of $29,835. For that money, I would rather just spend another $3,000 to get Mazda's larger CX-5 which is probably why you see Mazda sales being a little bit smaller, or a lot smaller than this versus the CX-5. It's just kind of a no-brainer to pick the bigger vehicle and spend a little bit more money if you guys are looking for something a little bit more practical. But I hope you guys have enjoyed my full overview on this 2019 Mazda CX-3. If you're also looking to see the latest cars I'm testing, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Redline_reviews. Like us on Facebook. And as always, guys, please keep subscribing to the Redline Reviews YouTube channel for all the latest reviews. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.